Thank you everyone for coming today. Am I audible?
Yes.
So today we'll discuss based on the Bhagavad-Gita.
Maybe those books which are other than
18th chapter. We'll discuss the 30th verse. So I'll explain the meaning and then we'll decide the verse together. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. So pravritti is that. Sorry. Now decrease that body.
స్విచ్ అవుట్ చేయాలి స్విచ్ అవుట్ చేసుకుంటే సోమ మాకు ఏమనుకుంటే అది
అక్కడ ప్రాక్టీస్
So pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. So pravritti is that which is to be done. We have inclination to do it and we do it. Nivritti is that which we avoid. So pravritti, you can repeat after me. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha.
Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha.
Karya akarya. So karya is that which is our duty. Akarya is that which is not to be done. Bhaya, bhaya, abhaya. That when we do it, we feel some fear, and that where we should not feel any fear. Karya karye bhaya bhaye.
Karya karye bhaya bhaye.
Bandham moksham chaya. Vyakti will know it, that what will cause bondage and what will bring liberation. Bandham moksham chaya vyakti.
Bandham moksham chaya vetti.
Buddhi sa partha satviki.
Buddhi sa partha satviki.
Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha.
Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha.
Karya karye bhaya bhaye.
Karya karye bhaya bhaye.
Bandham moksham chaya vetti.
Bandham moksham chaya vetti.
Buddhi sa partha satviki.
Buddhi sa partha satviki.
Let's try to recite it together now. 3 times. Not responsibly but together. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha.
Karya karye bhaya bhaye. Bandham moksham chaya vetti. Buddhi sa partha satviki. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. Karya karye bhaya bhaye. Bandham moksham chaya vetti. Buddhi sa partha satviki. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. Karya karye bhaya bhaye. Bandham moksham chaya vetti. Buddhi sa partha satviki.
Thank you all for coming today. And in this verse from the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna is talking about intelligence in sattva, in the mode of goodness. And for this intelligence, he is giving broadly 4 characteristics. So I'll write and draw certain things over here to explain. So he's talking about intelligence, and he's saying that we need to consider 4 factors. So bandham moksham is the most clear. That which will cause bondage or that will bring about liberation. So now this can be understood in a philosophical sense, that ultimately we get caught in the cycle of birth and death, or we are liberated. But it can also refer at a practical level, at a psychological level, that when we indulge in certain pleasures, if somebody takes alcohol, somebody takes drugs, then they get bound by it. So our actions have consequences. Those which are at one level, long-term consequences. Then there is bhaya and abhaya. That's one more factor. So when we have intelligence is associated with decision making. When we want to make decisions, Krishna is saying consider these 4 parameters. One is the consequence. That is it going to lead us to a more entangled situation? Like sometimes we speak one lie, and then to hide that lie we speak 5 more lies. And then hide those 5 lies we speak 25 more lies. So we get entangled in a complete web of lies at that. That's a consequence. A second part is the emotion. That do we feel fear or do we feel no fear? Now, this is one factor to consider. Sometimes while doing some things, we may feel, maybe I should not do this. Now that fear, whether it's healthy or not healthy, that's a separate question. But there are two different factors over here. We want to do something, there can be fear or no fear. There is emotion associated with it. Then he's saying karya karye bhaya. Karya karye is it our duty? Is it our obligation? So something which is to be done, is it obligation or is it not an obligation? So for example, if we come home and our child is starving, then cooking some food is our obligation. Now if we are on the street and we see a beggar, now and we say the small child is starving, we want to give some food. But that's not exactly an obligation. So now we could do something, go beyond our obligation and do it also. But that is one way we differentiate. Another he says is that pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. Is it that we have an inclination for doing it? There are some things which we have a natural inclination for doing some things. And some things we don't have that much of an inclination for doing. So, if we consider these four factors, so inclination, yes or no. So, for example, Arjuna in the Mahabharata had a natural inclination for archery. Karna had a natural inclination for archery. They were warriors. So, some kids, when they're growing up, some kids have natural inclination for music, some have for art, some may have for words and vocabulary. So, everybody has some natural inclinations. So broadly, if we consider intelligence is for decision making. Krishna is talking about how do we go about making decisions in our life. And that's the topic basically we're going to come to the topic of balance. But how do we take decisions? So he says there are these four factors. So normally when we are going through our life, if life is a straight track, we'll just go along that track. Okay, morning I wake up and then I take care of my house errands, then I go to work, and I come back and do certain things. Now, in one sense, every day we have to make some choices. Okay, should I cook this food or that food? Should I wear these clothes or those clothes? The small choices. Sometimes we have relatively big choices. Some choices could even be bigger in the sense that they could be in completely opposite directions also. So in life, you can say every day there are micro choices and there are some mega choices. So for example, if I decide I want to change my job or I want to move from a rented house to a own house, then which locality do I buy it? How much loan should I take for it? All these are mega choices. If somebody wants to get married, okay, whom do I get married? What basis? The mega choices. So now broadly speaking, intelligence is the faculty that is involved in decision making. So in general, when we function, the Gita explains that we have three levels of reality. That there is the soul, the body and the mind. So the body is our physical side, that's what we see when we look at each other. And beyond that is the mind. And then at the innermost level there is the soul. So all these three together comprise the self. So now when we look at things from the outer world, this is where Krishna talks about perception. Perception, or the word uses knowledge, because jnana. So how we take in things. That Krishna has talked about earlier from 18.20 to 22 in the 10 verses before. Right now, so this is about perception, but right now what we are talking about is action. So when we are acting, at that time Krishna talks about this in 18 30 to 32. And here, while we are making decisions, this with respect to the karmendriya, how we apply our karmendriya, that is associated primarily with intelligence. So, buddhi is for us to decide, once we have perceived, then how do I act? So, for example, somebody wants to learn driving. There's theoretical knowledge of driving, okay, here is the brake, here is the accelerator, here is the wheels. But then, when you want to actually drive the car, there are so many things to look at. Okay, I have to look ahead, but I have to look at this mirror also, I have to look at this mirror also. I have to make my leg doesn't get suddenly get pressed somewhere. I have to move the wheel also. I have to look at the fuel also. I have to look close by, I have to look far ahead also. Look on the right and the left also. There's so many things to look at. Sometimes people get overwhelmed. So that when we are acting, that's when intelligence comes in. So now, if we consider these 4 factors, so when we have to, when we especially have to make decisions in our life, that is when these various factors of intelligence come. So, what am I naturally inclined to do? What am I expected to do? What do I feel about doing this? What is my feeling? What is my emotion about it? And what will be the result of doing it? So these are 4 broad factors. What are the consequences? Definitely the word consequence has a slightly negative connotation. So result or output or outcome. So these are all words which are little more neutral. So we could say that now we can say we can't always very precisely predict the outcome. And that is true. But to some extent, we can predict the outcome. So, when we consider these 4 factors in a balanced way, that is when we take good decisions. And when we get overwhelmed, then often we end up taking not so good decisions. So let's look at these 4 factors, and I'll focus on some of them more than others. Because some of them are more controllable for us and some are not so controllable for us. So for example, the results, we don't know what results will come. To some extent we can predict, okay, if I work at this job, then this much salary I'll get. If I keep working at this job, then this is how I'll rise. If I raise this family, then I'll be having a family, I'll have some kids and we'll have. We can predict some results to some degrees. But the results to some extent, now Krishna says, when the results are foreseeable, definitely we should consider them carefully. But the inclinations, we all have certain inclinations. Some of us may be more introvert, some of us may be more extrovert. Some people like more structure and predictability in their life. Some people like more adventure and spontaneity in their life. So we all have our inclinations. If we consider the Mahabharata, we see that there are 5 brothers in the Mahabharata. Who are the 5 brothers? Yudhishthir, Bhim, Arjun, Nakul and Sahadeva. Now sometimes if you meet some people, especially if you meet some siblings, then often we want to see what are the similarities and what are the differences between them. Especially if they're twins, they look very similar, especially if they're identical twins. But if they're siblings, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, then they may look similar. What are the similarities, what are the differences? Now if we look at Yudhishthir and Bhima, they're brothers, but it's very difficult to find 2 brothers who are more different. So English as a language has its idiosyncrasies. Actually, every language has its typical features. So I have a younger brother in America. He's settled in Detroit. So when I travel to America, I go to Detroit temple, and he comes for my talks. So once I'm introducing some of the devotees over there, that he's my younger brother. And then my brother doesn't look like me at all. He looks very different. So there's an Indian devotee over there. Immediately asked, "Is he your real brother?" Then there was an American devotee over here. Afterwards he asked me, "Do Indians have imaginary brothers also?" So for them, real brother, what is the idea that the opposite of real is imaginary? So for us it's like real brother is and the cousin brother.
So there's something Indian language. So that is present in India courteously. What is your good name? Do you have a bad name also? So language has its nuances. But so sometimes two brothers may be very different. So now if we consider Yudhishthira and Bhima, it is difficult to imagine two brothers who were more different than this. Both of them were Kshatriyas, that's it, both of them are warriors. But Yudhishthira is more like a Brahman Kshatriya. That means he likes to study, he likes to discuss. There's a conflict, we'll sit and negotiate, sometimes we'll bend backwards to avoid the conflict. Now Bhima on the other hand is a Kshatriya. He's a Kshatriya squared. That means he will be itching for a fight if there is opportunity. And now both of them have their natural inclinations. And they're united because they have affection, they have common values. But still, it's a balancing act. And sometimes Arjuna has to do the balancing in between. So the point is, we all have our natural inclinations. Sometimes we need to regulate them, but we can't repress them completely. So, the inclinations are one factor. Now if we consider, go back over here. So the obligations, we all have certain obligations. We may have family obligations, we may have job obligations, we may have social obligations. So there are certain things that are expected from us. So now when we are going through all of this, at that time, each factor in its own way is important. But some factors can overshadow other factors. So now when we want to balance in our life, so broadly speaking, the word balance is a very interesting word in my sense. So when do we use the word balance? Like somebody in a physical sense, when do we use the word balance? Sorry? Okay. But if you're talking with a child, when would you use the word balance at that time? In a physical sense? Sorry?
Steady.
Steady. So if they're driving a cycle, if a child is learning to drive a cycle, and then what does balance mean at that time? The cycle stays vertical. So we lose balance. Lose balance means generally we fall. So broadly speaking, balance involves. We take 2 slides. So balance involves multiple forces. So when somebody is in the balance, so one standard example of balance is, say somebody is a trapeze artist. They are on a rope. Now they could fall down from this side of the rope, they could fall down from this side of the rope. So basically, there are forces which will pull us off balance. And we need to stay in balance. So in a physical sense, there are pulls of gravity. So a car, a cycle may fall on this side or fall on that side. So if people become dizzy, then we experience vertigo, then we fall. So basically, similarly for us, in life when we talk, broadly, if we are going through the journey of life, then one duty may pull us in one direction, another duty may pull us in another direction. So there is a karya, a karya. So what is to be done, what to say yes to, what to say no to. That's something you have to constantly keep deciding. So when we are pulled, say in the office there's a lot of work, in the home there's a lot of work, and we pulled in both directions. And how do I manage it that time? So this is where the role of emotion comes in. I'm talking about one key point. I talked about these 4 factors. I said among these 4, this is what we are going to focus on, the emotion part. Because this is what often is the most controllable for us. Our inclinations are already what they are. Our obligations, we are in the structured society, there are certain obligations we have. Then there are certain results that are going to come. We try to optimize them, but they are not in our control. What is in control is our emotion. So now, one key difference which we will try to discuss today is that there is work which is an objective reality. Okay, I have to do this task. But around the work comes workload. Workload is the burden felt on our mind because of that work. Now, while the work may cause a workload, but the two are not the same. So, why are they not the same? Because it depends on how our mind sees it. What is the state of our mind? So, we all have a certain amount of work and we have to do it. If we don't do it, then either things will go wrong or we have to, there is some results of that. But quite often, as contrasted to the work is a burden, but the workload is often a far bigger burden. So we could say the work is broadly objective. This is, okay, I have 10 things to do today, or I have 25 things to do today. And just a few months ago I was in Australia and I was talking about one session I was telling, we have many to-dos. So one person raises his hand and says, I don't have any to-dos in my life, I have must-dos. There are so many things, many of these things that work, my whole life will collapse. So these are not to-dos, these are must-dos. So now, that may be true, but the workload is, what is? Subjective. Subjective means that which is felt by us emotionally. So sometimes what happens, we have a particular plan of how we want to do things, and suddenly a new task ad hoc comes up. Then some people just become very anxious, very agitated, they just sometimes fall apart. There can be either implosion, where they collapse, or there's an explosion, where they yell at others. So now this is what comes from our emotions. And in many ways, the art of balancing is to learn to separate the work from the workload. So what is the actual task and what is my mind's projection? What is my mind's conception? What is my mind's imagination? So, I have to do so much work, I have to do so much work, I have to do so much work. That actually exhausts us even before we do the work. So, the concept of Maya, that is the illusion, that is increasingly talked about in psychology also. They will not use the term Maya. But the idea that our mind creates its own realities. So, in general, when we face a lot of work we have to do, the emotion that comes with bhaya, the bhaya in this causes worry. We start worrying about things. So now, worry, broadly speaking, the emotion becomes bigger in three ways. One is that we worry about things before they have come. That means in one sense we are anticipating this problem will come. Now, there's a difference between worrying and preparing, and I'll come to that. So, tomorrow I have this interview. What if I forget? What if I forget all the answers? What if the examiner is biased? What if the examiner doesn't like me? Or what if? So we often anticipate worries, anticipate problems. Now, that is one problem. The other is we often exaggerate problems. Exaggerate means that maybe we've got some work which it requires us half an hour to do more work. But our mind says, hey, this is so unfair. Why does everybody dump all their extra work on me? Nobody values me, nobody respects me, everybody exploits me. And then, because of that mental drama, the trouble becomes even more. So this is where we worry before we need to. So we worry before we need to, we worry more than we need to. That's when we exaggerate. And the third is when we imagine. So there is no problem at all. So we worry when we don't need to at all. So this idea of Maya, that there is a particular situation, and around that situation our mind creates a story. How this is, why this is like this, what is going to happen. So I was talking about how psychologists also come up with the idea of the mind creating stories around particular situations. So once there was a person whose car broke down, and he was driving when his car broke down. At that time, when he stopped the car, he had a spare tire, but he realized that he didn't have a jack. So he looked around, he saw there was a house nearby. And so I think maybe I should go and ask this person, knock on the door. But as he was going over there, his mind started imagining. Says, what if that person is a very nasty person? Now, what if that person sees that I am in need, and instead of giving me the jack as a favor for a few minutes, he demands money for it. Okay, he demands $50, he demands $100, he demands $500, he demands $1,000. And as in his mind, he was imagining how much he would ask. But he started getting more and more and more angry. And he says, how nasty people are. People are so inconsiderate, people are so exploitative. What happened to the world? And then he went and knocked on the door, and in his mind there was such an anger. So when that person opened the door, forget it, I don't want this jack, get lost. So here what has happened is, objectively there is no problem. Maybe there will be, maybe there is not. Right now there is no problem. But what has happened? The mind story around it has become so big that the reality is completely overshadowed by that. So, in the Mahabharata, Duryodhana constantly imagined that the Pandavas will steal his kingdom. Now, not once did the Pandavas ever threaten the Kauravas' kingdom. The Pandavas only wanted something to do, and they were given a barren wilderness, an overgrown wilderness, and Khandava, and they converted into Indraprastha. And even after the gambling match where everything was lost, they said that we have stayed in the forest for 13 years and now please give us our kingdom back. But Duryodhana thought that they are a threat. So basically, this often, the story that the mind is creating around our situations, that is what consumes our mental energy. It exhausts us. It irritates us, it frustrates us. And then, the actual tasks that we have to do, we no longer have strength to do those tasks because our mind has consumed the energy. So, in one sense, for us to balance, there is no magic formula by which we can cut down work in our life. Yes, of course, there are some tasks we can cut down. But there is a basic amount of work which we all have to do. We can't change that. But if we consider this particular point, that there is a work and there is workload. The workload is often because of anticipated, exaggerated or imagined trouble associated with the work. So say if we have a small baby and the baby is crying. Now that is, we have to comfort the baby. Maybe if we have slightly older child, the child is cranky. We have to deal with it. But sometimes the mind starts telling a story. Why does this child not listen to me? It seems that this child is deliberately finding ways to make my life miserable. Now, the child is being difficult, but it's not the child is intentionally trying to create trouble for us. But that story which the mind creates, that makes our problems far worse. So, this is till this point, I have analyzed the problem now. Now we'll move on to the solution. So here we'll try to understand how the mind works. So, and we will try to see how the mind works and how we can get the mind to work for us instead of against us. So basically, like I said, the mind is in between the soul and the body. And outside the body there is the world. So if you consider this to be the self overall. So the mind is in between. And what happens? In the mind, perceptions, information comes from outside. And based on that perception, we have to make some decisions. So for example, we are told, okay, if you're in office, you have to do this work. Or today, oh, this guest is going to come, we have to cook something for him. Okay. That's information that has come. Now, in one sense, the thoughts, the emotions, let's focus on the emotions, because we're talking about fear and worry and anxiety and that idea of workload. They come from two sources. One is the outer situation. But along with that, there are inner impressions. So, what happens? So, in general, these impressions in the mind, they are also called as samskar. The word samskar has both a positive and negative meaning. The positive meaning refers to good samskaras, and then we have certain ceremonies which create some samskaras. So we have namakaran, we have vivaha samskar, like that. These are all ceremonies which are meant to create good impressions in our mind. So the idea is that these impressions shape our actions. So once a year, I take a group of about 25-30 Americans on a tour of India. They are spiritually minded people and mostly yoga students. So mostly women. They come and they go on a tour of India. So when they had come once, a few years ago, they had heard about the big fat Indian wedding. So they said, we want to attend a wedding. So in Mumbai, one of our congregation devotees' daughter's wedding was there, so they went for the wedding. And at the end of the trip, when we asked them what was the most memorable event for them, so two of them said that it was the wedding. They said, what did you like about the wedding? He says, it was such a huge affair, like 800 people for the wedding, and it was going to go on for 3 days. We were there for 3 hours. Like you see in the West, weddings are not that big. They just for a few hours, people come to whatever church or wherever they are in the wedding. So then one of the young women, she said that after attending such a wedding, you can never forget you are married. Now you may say, how can you forget you are married? But for some people, just go to a law court and sign a paper. There's no impression created in the mind. Oh, this is a serious event. There's something very serious. There's a lifelong commitment to it. So the idea is impressions, sanskar refers to the activities that create impressions in us. Now samskars also refer to the impressions which can be agitating, which can be troubling for us. So in a negative, so samskar can positive sense refers to ceremonies, but in a more psychological sense, samskar can also refer to traumas. So somebody was in a car crash, and then whenever they get into a car, they start remembering it. Oh, this car had crashed like that. So this meaning of samskar, we can write it as samskar. So everybody has some or the other scar in their psyche. Now it's like a wound inside us, and as long as that wound is there, we are affected by it. Now how do we know this second kind of samskar? This wound is there inside us. A typical characteristic of this is, if anywhere there is a wound, there is an injury, what happens? Once I was in America, I was giving a talk. It was a big seminar auditorium, and I was the dais, and the organizer wanted to tell me something urgently. The organizer came from behind and tapped me on the shoulder. And he tapped me, I almost screamed. He said, what happened? He said, actually I had fallen on my shoulder and I have a bit of a sprain over here. Oh, sorry, I didn't know about that. So basically what happens, whenever there is any injury, a small stimulus, huge reaction. Isn't it? Now what applies to a physical injury also applies to a mental wound. So for all of us, based on the kind of samskaras that we have, we may tend to overreact. So if, for example, somebody was bitten by a dog in their childhood, then as soon as they see a dog, this might be just a cute, cuddly little poodle. But when they see that dog, all that they'll see is, oh, this is sharp teeth. They'll bite me. And they'll become extremely uncomfortable. They can become fearful. So for all of us, there are certain impressions in the mind. And say, if a particular kind of person, maybe a person from a particular background, a person of a particular physical size, or a person of particular nature, that person had troubled us in the past. Maybe while growing up, there's somebody in our neighborhood who was like a bully. And then, now when we see anyone like that, immediately the mind gets triggered, the mind gets agitated. And then we start overreacting. So, this is where many times when the worry story starts for us, that starts because some samskar is triggered. Maybe once we were in the interview and we forgot, or we froze at that time. And the next time, whenever we go for an interview, maybe that thought comes in, maybe I'll freeze. And then if that samskar is there, then there's almost an involuntary overreaction over there. So here, when we tend to get imbalanced about things, it is because not just the work that we have to do, but the fact that we have to do the work, that objective reality, so what comes from outside, we'll say here is the work. Okay, let's make a separate image over here. That okay. So, if this is the mind, now there is the work coming from here. And based on the samskara in the mind, an impression comes up. And the idea that it is a node comes from here. So the work has to be done, but along with that, the work a story comes. The story might be, oh, people always dump all that work on me, and nobody respects me. Even after I do all this work, nobody will even appreciate what I'm going to do. So there are so many stories that come with it, that then the work starts feeling like a load. So most of the times when we talk about balance, we talk about how to deal with the outer work. And yes, there are techniques for that. Sometimes we have to learn to say no to people. So I'm not focusing on that aspect. I'm going to focus on this inner aspect of how the mind creates a load over there, and then that overwhelms us. So when this impression is there inside us, when the samskar is there, so how do we deal with it? So the solution would be, at one level, curing the wound. And if you cannot cure the wound, till it gets cured, managing the wound. So for example, if I have a shoulder sprain, ideally I do some therapy, I take some treatment, I get cured. But till then, I have to make sure that I don't bump against the shoulder, I don't accidentally rub against the shoulder, whatever, I don't take preventive measures, protective measures. So similarly for our samskaras, there are two things. We manage the samskaras, and then we eventually heal. So managing and healing, both of these are important. So in the Bhagavad-Gita, when Krishna talks about managing the mind, he talks about two basic principles. He says, Abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena cha gruhyate. Now, the word abhyas and vairagya can be understood in many different ways. Different acharyas translate it differently. I'll explain in a particular way that in general, for us to function in life, we need boundaries and we need bonds. So let's go back to the physical injury example. If say I have a slight sprain in the hand, then maybe I can lift a light weight. But if I have to lift a heavy weight, I myself have to decide, I cannot lift this. So I have to create some boundaries for myself. Okay, how much weight can I lift? Now along with that, I have to create some bonds. The bonds would mean that I do certain exercises regularly. I commit to a disciplined regimen of taking treatment or doing exercise. And by that bond and boundary, healing will occur. So what applies in many ways to the physical world, physical body, also applies to the mind. See, one of the advantages or one of the strengths of this Bhagavad-Gita model of the self is that it doesn't dismiss the mental. It doesn't say, oh, it's all in your mind only. It's all imagination, all these thoughts. The Gita says the mind is also real. Just like the body is real, just like the soul is real, the mind is also real. And the mind is real means the mind can also get really wounded. And the mind will also need to be healed. So, now, this principle of bonds and boundaries, which would apply to the healing of the body, we also apply to our mind. So, let's try to look at these two things now. If you can, this is the last part of the talk. If you forget everything from this talk, you can try to remember this four-quadrant diagram. If for all of us, there are some boundaries and there are some bonds. So, boundaries is vairagya. There are certain things which we avoid, which we say no to. And bonds is abhyas. There are certain things which we persist in, which we keep doing. So now we could say boundaries are present, yes or no. Bonds are present, yes or no. So we will have four broad quadrants over here. Like boundary is present, bond present. Neither bond nor boundaries, or only bond and no boundaries, or only boundaries and no bonds. So let's try to understand this now with this example. Let's start with a simple example, and we'll take three examples of this, and then we'll finish with question answers. So consider the simple example of the dog. So somebody was bitten by a dog. Then, at a basic level, they need to keep a distance from dogs. That is necessary. But keeping a distance from dogs, is that what they are meant to do all their life? No. Now, if suddenly they come across a dog, they might get scared. So at one level, keeping a boundary is important. But the boundary alone is not a solution. A bond would be that if there is a disciplined dog, if there is a gentle dog, then they encounter that dog. See, what happens is, basically the mind samskaras, a samskar, it basically creates an auto-connect between a situation and in a particular situation, a current situation or a possible situation and a future trouble. Dog means is back. So that connection is created in the mind. And now what we need to do is, one is don't have the dog so that connection won't be created. But that's not the lasting solution. You have to change the connection in the mind. So, how do we change the connection? By creating positive impressions. Okay, you see a dog, maybe you go and touch a dog. This is a dog of friendly also. So, that creates new impressions. So, basically, in the mind, avoiding the negative impressions is one part of it. But we cannot do it permanently. We also need to create positive impressions. So, for all of us, what would it mean? See, based on self-observation, we can know when we tend to get provoked, when we tend to overreact. So, for example, generally, common set of boundaries is what is called a halt. Have any of you heard this word halt? What does halt mean? Stop. It's like a forceful stop. There are four situations. Generally, our whatever negative stories our mind tells, those negative samskaras get triggered. First is when we are hungry. So, if you're hungry and somebody says, can you do some more? And you just overreact with that. That's a normal biological reaction. But second is when we're already angry. We're already upset with something. And then we're already upset with one person, somebody makes some demand. That might not be a very unreasonable demand, but we'll explode at that person. Third is when we feel lonely. When we feel as if nobody with us, nobody understands us, nobody cares for us. And then on top of that, if somebody comes and says, do this, somebody demands from us, then we overreact. And third is when we are tired. So, it's the same thing If somebody tells us do it, we have to do it tomorrow, but they tell us just before we sleep, and we'll not be able to sleep, we'll be resenting. The next morning they tell us, okay, you have to do this. Okay, we have some freshness, we have some energy. So this is a common example of boundaries. Each of us may have particular situations where we may need to decide some boundaries we need to have. So for some of us, it might be particular people. So some people tend to bring the best out of us. Some people tend to send the best out of us. That means whatever was good inside us, we just forget that. Or another way to put it that some people, at least for all of us, it will be like some people bring happiness wherever they go. And some people bring happiness whenever they go. So both these will be there in life. So for us, if we know there are particular people with whom I get triggered. So it's like for us, if somebody asks us to do something, if one person asks us to do something, okay, I'll do it. Some other person says, how dare you ask? They're always piling up on me. So we all have our mind's vulnerabilities. They may be based on facts, they may not be based on facts, whatever it is. But each one of us, it's important to be aware of our boundaries. So rather than thinking, oh, I'm just short-tempered, I get a nervous breakdown, I get a panic attack, oh, I get depressed, I'm irritable. Don't just tell these stories to yourself. On the opposite, just understand that yes, I have a mind which is vulnerable in a particular, and I need to be careful about it. That is the idea of Vairag. So when we create boundaries for ourselves, that helps us to not get unexpectedly triggered. So the boundary is good, like I already said, at external level we can manage by saying no to certain things. But internally we are aware. And if there's going to be a difficult conversation, we have to have with someone, tell them, we are tired, let's not have this today. We'll have it tomorrow at so and so time. So like that, try to create boundaries for ourselves. Now the other aspect is, that's not alone enough. You also have to create bonds. So here, let's consider another metaphor. So the mind is, like I said, it's in between the soul and the body. So if you go over here, it's like a computer system. So the body is like the hardware. The mind is like the software. The soul is like the user. So the mind has certain programming that gets activated. So say now I am based in Mumbai. In Mumbai there's this small thing. Have any of you heard of this? So now, suppose somebody has visited a website called Bollywood.com. And they have visited maybe 10 times, 50 times, 100 times. And now they come for a spiritual talk like this. And they hear about the Bhagavad-Gita. On hearing the Bhagavad-Gita, what happens? They say, I want to know more about the Bhagavad-Gita. So they open their browser and start typing Bhagavad-Gita. They type B. And what happens? Yes. Now, Bollywood comes as an autocomplete. They didn't want to go to Bollywood.com, but that comes as autocomplete. Why? Because their computer hates them. Is that true? No. It's just what has been stored in the browser. The browser history comes back as an autocomplete to them. So the samskaras in our mind are like our browser history. So, for example, if somebody gives us some extra work, immediately, from our past experience, people exploit me, people dump all their work on me, people just use me and nobody cares for me. So that program automatically starts. Now that may be true, that may not be true, but that starts automatically. It's like an impression in our mind, which goes up. So now, if you want to go to Bhagavad-Gita.com, what do you have to do? You have to type the whole thing. Bhagavad-Gita. So we type 12 letters. It seems like climbing Mount Everest. But we do that, and once we have visited that website, then next time when we type B, still Bollywood.com might come as the first autocomplete, but Bhagavad-Gita will also come somewhere in it. And if we keep visiting Bhagavad-Gita.com, then what will happen? Eventually when we type B, Bhagavad-Gita will come. So it's like if I am here and I want to visit Bhagavad-Gita.com, So for this, there is abhyasa. Keep doing this. And in Bollywood.com for that autocomplete, for that there is vairagya. Vairagya means don't do this. So abhyasa to kaunteya, vairagya chakruyate. So how do we change the browser history? It is not a mystery. It is, now of course in the browser history, you can just delete the browser, or delete the browser history, or format the computer, or just delete that particular app. And none of those options are there for our mind. We can't delete any browser history. But there is a way to reprogram the mind. And so we all have certain scars from the past. Some scars, we all have some scars from our past. Now some of them we may know consciously and we can try to deal with. Some of them we may not even know. People may go to therapy and try to understand what happened to me in my childhood and this time and that time. That can help sometimes if some problems are very acute. But there is so much in the past we can't really even know. Like for a whole lifetime we visited many websites and you type one and suddenly one site comes up. I mean, I don't remember when had I visited that site. Yeah, if I had the same computer or if I transferred the same computer but I had the same login ID, so the whole browser history has gone. Maybe I had visited that website 22 years ago. Now remembering that also is going to take so much time. That's not necessarily required. So this abhyasa, persistence, this is where often spiritual practices are very powerful. So when we do spiritual practices, within that there are often a great emphasis on repetition. That chant the same mantra, do the same puja, that do the same thing again. Why? When there is repetition, through that repetition basically a new impression is being created in the mind. And now there are many ways in which the negative impressions can be replaced with positive impressions. But the last point which I'll make in this is that when we practice bhakti, there is a fundamental difference. So for example, somebody may say whenever they get stressed, they get agitated, okay, take some deep breaths. So whenever you get stressed, you feel like yelling at somebody, or our mind starts feeling sorry for ourselves, just take a deep breath. Just take 3 deep breaths. So now, this is good. It's good to replace one unhealthy response by an unhealthy default response by a healthier conscious response. But what happens? Sometimes this itself does not work. Once there were 2 kids used to fight very much. So both their mothers told, whenever you feel angry, count till 10. So one day one kid came back and he had his face injured. So what happened? He said that we got into a fight. Did you count till 10? He said yes. Did he count till 10? Yes. Then what happened? Because he finished his counting faster. So sometimes what happens is mechanical methods to replace one healthy response by another healthy response doesn't work so easily. It can work, not completely dismissing it, but in bhakti we get access to a higher power. So what does that higher power mean? When we practice bhakti, we try to remember the Supreme Lord, we try to remember Krishna. And at one level, that's also mechanical. That mechanical means, say, whenever we feel agitated, whenever we feel frustrated, at that time, just calm down, chant a few mantras, chant some Om, chant some Hare Krishna mantra, chant, remember God. Now that is going to create some healthy impressions. So that's a healthier response as compared to an unhealthy response. Now, I was at Stanford, I was invited to give a talk, and they have a neuroscience, a lot of neuroscience is one of the fields where the most promising interface between science and spirituality. So now there is lots of scientific evidence to suggest that meditation benefits people. Different kinds of meditation may be there, but people who meditate regularly, if you look at their brain images, The brain imaging itself shows that their brains are more robust. The neuroplasticity has led to their brains becoming healthier. So there's undeniable evidence for that. But then everything is in the reductionistic science, everything they try to reduce it to a very mechanical level. So there is an attempt to try to develop something called a meditation helmet. So what is meditation helmet? The idea is that if certain parts of the brain are activated, then some comforting, healthy, positive chemicals are secreted, neurochemicals, and then we feel better. So when people meditate regularly, those parts of the brain are said to have activated. So what they're trying to see is that, can we create a helmet, you wear the helmet, and then you turn on power, and the parts of the brain which are associated with the calming, comforting effect, they get activated, and you feel calm. So now, the problem is that the neurochemicals, they are the symptom, they are not the cause. But why are certain neurochemicals triggered? So if we want to be calm, we need, for calm to go up, calm has to go down. So, I want to decide, I want to do this, and I want this person to listen to me, and I want to get that done, and I want to buy this, and I want to watch this. If there is all that desire going wild inside us, it's just externally trying to force oneself to become calm. It's like there's a disease rampaging in the body, there are germs inside the body, and we take a pain medication, we feel good. That's not going to work. So, the point is that what happens when we start practicing bhakti is that it is at one level a positive impression we create. But at another level, what we understand is that whatever is happening in my life, it is not outside God's plan. That, okay, right now this person may be treating me badly, this person may be doing something like this to me, but there is some higher plan. There is some higher purpose. So it's like if I am here and somebody is doing something to me, maybe that person is doing something negative to me. Maybe they give me too much work. They expect too much from me. And that is at one level true. We can't deny that. But what? When we practice bhakti, we are understanding that Krishna, God is above us. And Krishna is not just above us, actually, yata pravritti bhutana ena sarvavidam tattva. Everything is within Krishna. Krishna is not up there far away, everything is within his jurisdiction. And therefore, whatever is being done to us, that is also in some ways a part of Krishna's plan. That doesn't mean necessarily that whatever is happening is good or we are passively accepting. But it is that there is a bigger vision over it. And once we get that sense that there is a bigger vision, then the agitation over the unfairness, the agitation over the feeling of exploitation, that substantially goes down. And then we are able to respond to the situation more calmly. So when I came in, some of you may notice that I need crutches for walking. So when I was about 1, my mother took me to a clinic to get the polio vaccine. And it is a small town, so sometimes the power supply would go off over there. So when the power supply had gone off for that clinic the previous night, and because the power supply had gone off, the fridge had got heated up, the vaccine had got not contaminated, the germs had got multiplied there. Neither the attendant nor the physician noticed that. And when I was giving that vaccine, instead of preventing polio, it ended up causing polio. Now, I don't remember any of that. I was about 1, I was told I was learning to walk, and I fell down, and I couldn't walk normally thereafter. But my first memory of that is, when I was about 2.5 or 3, at that time, a distant relative had come to our home, and she was consoling my mother, saying, "It's so sad, your son got polio." And I remember my mother's voice, very calm, clear, confident. She said, whatever he lacks physically, God will provide him intellectually. So now, I don't know why my mother said that. She passed away soon after, so I wouldn't get to ask her. But somehow that stayed with me. Whether it was she had observed some intellectual ability in me, or was it her hope, was it her prayer, was it her blessing? But as I grew up, I found that I had some intellectual ability. And I was able to do well in studies. And all the physical deficiency was there, physical limitation was there, but that intellectual strength helped me to move through life. So what happens is, we see a particular level of reality. This person is like this. But our mind creates a further reality around it. Oh, this is so unfair, why did this happen to me? But when we practice bhakti, we understand that Krishna is ultimately in charge. That does not mean, again, as I said, that everything that happens is good. Sometimes bad things do happen. But even through bad, some good can come out. So in that sense, we develop a more long-term vision. We develop more patience. And once we develop patience, then we can avoid overreacting to the situation. And that work becoming workload, that can be prevented. So for us to see that ultimately, I'm in the situation, I'm pulled in this direction, I'm pulled in this direction. It is not that I am alone trying to do this. Krishna knows what I am going through. And Krishna knows I am in this situation. So when we have that mood of that seva bhava is, oh Krishna, what do you want me to do now? How do you want me to serve now? What is the way I can follow? So rather than having that sense of frustration or resentment, why is this situation here? When we have this vision of bhakti, when we understand that it is not just coming from here, it is coming from Krishna ultimately. Then it's only here that we start, why this wasn't treating me like this? But here what happens is, okay, how? Okay, now that the situation has come, it is not outside Krishna's plan, how can I do that? That itself will bring a certain level of calmness and clarity. Bhajapure mana, Shrinandanandana, Abhaya Charan. So this Krishna said, Rohita mat chitta sarva durgani, mat prasada darishyasi. If you become conscious of me, you will pass over all obstacles by my grace. I'll summarize what I discussed today. Mainly, we discussed about 3 points. Our top was about balance. So, I started by talking about what is the cause of imbalance. He said that there is the objective side and the subjective side. So we discussed based on 18.22. There are 4 factors out of which we focus on the emotions. The imbalance, the objective side is there is the work we have to do. But the subjective side is what we feel, that is the workload that comes in. Oh, I have to do so much. And why is life so unfair? Because of which I have to do so much. So we discussed that how our mind, what it does it creates 3 things. It anticipates, it exaggerates, and it imagines. So anticipates means, oh, in future this will happen, this will happen, this will happen. And we suffer before we need to. The problem has not yet come, but still we are already suffering. When it exaggerates, we suffer more than we need to. And when we imagine, we suffer when we don't have to at all. So I give the example of that person going a car jack and was getting angry in the mind itself. So this is the mind's story that is creating. So there is the work and there is the workload that is created. So for us to balance, we can't really change much of the work that we have to do. But this load, we can change. So to understand, first I talk about balance, then I talk about mind. So how does the mind work? The mind is the intermediate between the external, there is the task, the work comes from outside, and in the mind there are impressions. There are these samskaras. The word samskar has both a positive and a negative connotation. The positive refers to some ceremony that creates good impressions. The negative refers to the wounds that are there inside us. We focus on this part, some scar beyond. So because of this, what happens? From inside something gets triggered, and then that creates the sense of a load. So he said the mind is like the body. Just the body can get wounded, the mind can get wounded. So when there's injury, small stimulus, huge reaction. That is a typical characteristic. So we all can observe ourselves and understand where we tend to get overreact, where our mind starts feeling overburdened, irritated, frustrated. And then in the solution part, we discuss two things. We all need to create some boundaries. So the boundaries, we have yes or no. So the boundaries I discussed about 4 things. Typically, when we feel hungry, when we feel angry. So I was giving this class, and there was one kid, this was a new kid, and I was giving this class, and somehow the class started late and got over it. So one kid, he raised his hand and says, I'm now feeling hungry and angry. So the idea was split the classroom now. So we feel lonely or we feel tired. There's a time when we are vulnerable. Beyond that, each of us may have certain people, they may trigger us. So we have to be aware of our boundaries and keep ourselves protected. So the best, and then we also have bonds. Bonds are where we create new impressions inside. So we all want to get into this. We have the mind that we have, that we want to get into this 4th quadrant from wherever we might be. So create some boundaries, and then with respect to bonds, I discussed about how do we create them. I gave 3 examples for this. That one was the example of a dog. The second was the example of software, Bollywood and Bhagavad-Gita. So the idea is that we try to reprogram the mind. And when you're reprogramming the mind, any healthy habit, so healthy habit is good. So if we tend to get angry, take deep breaths. That is good. But if there is a bhakti habit, it is even better. Because bhakti habit doesn't just change the story that our mind is telling us, it reminds us that there is a bigger reality. That there is God in control and God has a plan. That vision will calm us down. Sometimes we'll consciously remember that and that will calm us down. Sometimes even without consciously remembering that, just the remembrance of God will calm us. And as our mind becomes more and more reprogrammed, then we'll be able to deal with work more efficiently without feeling overloaded by it. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So, I have written about some 30 books. Out of these, we have 3 books over here. This is, most of what I spoke today is from this book. You are not your mind. You are better. So there are 64 articles. Each article is just 2 pages. And some, like I was doing conceptual graphics, explain the concepts. So what exactly is the mind? How is it different from the brain? And why does the mind tend to fear negatives so much? Why does it remember past negatives rather than past positives? So why does the mind seem to be so difficult to control? To what extent can spiritual practices help in controlling the mind? So how does the neurochemistry and the spirituality interact with the working of the mind? So 64 questions about the mind are answered in this book. Then this is a book of prayers, especially if you want to calm the mind. So these are prayers. Each prayer is 1 page. And it is based on, you have a little picture of Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON, the author of Bhagavad-Gita as it is, so he composed these prayers when he was going to America. He was alone, without any support, without any financial backing also. It's a very difficult task, could have been filled with anxiety. But his faith in God and his prayerfulness to God, these are prayers which you can meditate on if you want. And to help us feel more spiritually closely connected. And this is a book on the Ramayana. This is translated Telugu. This is wisdom from Ramayana on life and relationships. So I've taken about 20 incidents from the Ramayana. So Vali and Sugriva were best of friends, but they ended up becoming enemies. So there's 2 brothers who became enemies. Now, on the other hand, there's a misunderstanding between, say, Bharat and Ram, when Ram was exiled and Bharat was accused. But that misunderstanding didn't escalate. So why was that? So when Sita was abducted. Is Sita to be blamed for that? Is Ram to be blamed for that? Is Lakshman to be blamed for that? So when bad things happen, sometimes blaming makes them worse. So how we can respond to bad things without making them worse? So practical lessons from the script, from the Ramayana, are there in that book. So I'll be here sometime if any of you have any further questions or you would like to have the book signed. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.